The HOA president looked me dead in the eye and said, "I am the law." She fined me $5,000.
This piece of paper is 70 years old. It smells like dust and old library books.
It was just a workshop.
A place to build cabinets. But to Brenda, the HOA president, it was a violation. Can an HOA fine you if your land isn't actually in the HOA? They didn't think so. They thought they owned everything. But I found a chain of...
I remember the day I got the keys. It felt like the finish line of a marathon I'd been running for 10 years. My wife, Sarah, and I had been saving every single penny since we got married. We lived in a cramped apartment where the walls were paper thin and the neighbors were loud. We skipped vacations. We drove old cars that rattled when you hit 60 miles an hour. We ate cheap food. We did all of that for this specific moment. We stood in the driveway of 402 Maple Ridge Drive. It was perfect. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. It was a corner lot, slightly bigger than the others in the neighborhood. It had a big oak tree in the front yard that looked like it had been there for 100 years. And in the back, tucked away in the corner of the property, was this beautiful, weathered workshop. It was built on a solid concrete foundation with real cedar siding. That workshop was the selling point for me. I'm a carpenter by hobby. I needed a place to escape, a place to build things with my hands. The realtor, a nice guy named Mike, had handed us the keys with a smile. But looking back, maybe there was a little bit of pity in his eyes. He mentioned the Homeowners Association, the HOA. They are pretty active, he said. They're like things, uniform. I didn't care. I signed the papers. I signed the HOA acknowledgement form without really reading the fine print. That was mistake number one. A mistake that would almost cost me everything. For the first 2 months, it was paradise. We unpacked. We painted the living room a soft blue. I set up my table saw in the workshop. I felt like a king. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives. No trash cans were ever visible. No cars were parked on the street overnight. It looked like a movie set. I didn't realize that on a movie set, someone is always watching the director's monitor. I met the director on a Tuesday evening. I was in the driveway, washing my truck. It's a work truck, a 2015 Ford F-150. It's got a few dents, a ladder rack, and some mud on the tires because I actually use it for work. I was scrubbing the wheel wells when I felt a shadow fall over me. I looked up, and there she was. She was short, maybe in her early 60s, with hair that was dyed a blonde so bright it almost hurt to look at. She was wearing a floral blouse and holding a clipboard. Not a phone, not a purse. A clipboard. "You must be the new owner," she said. She didn't offer a hand to shake. She didn't smile. "Hi," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "I'm Dave. My wife Sarah and I just moved in." She looked at my hand, then at the rag, then back at my face. "I'm Brenda. I'm the president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." "Nice to meet you, Brenda," I said. I tried to be friendly. You always try to be friendly at first. "We take a lot of pride in our community, David," she said. She looked at my truck. Her eyes narrowed like she was looking at a stain on a white carpet. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked in driveways overnight. They must be garaged." I laughed a little. "Oh, this isn't a commercial fleet vehicle, Brenda. It's my personal truck. I just have a ladder rack on it." "It looks commercial," she said. Her voice was flat. "It's unsightly. And the mud. We don't bring mud onto the driveways here. It stains the concrete." I looked at the driveway. It was concrete. It's meant to be driven on. "I'm washing it right now," I said, my smile fading a little bit. "See that you do?" she said. Then she looked past me, toward the backyard. She went up on her tiptoes, trying to see over the wooden fence. "And we need to discuss the structure in the back." "The workshop?" I asked. "The shed," she corrected me. "It doesn't match the architectural aesthetic of the main dwelling. The siding is cedar. Your house is vinyl. It's a violation." "Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That workshop has been there for 20 years. The previous owner built it. It was there when I bought the house. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. Click, click, click. The previous owner was negligent, and the board was perhaps too lenient. But I am not the previous president. I follow the rules, David, and so will you. She turned around and walked away. She didn't say goodbye. She just marched down the sidewalk, stopping at the next house to inspect a flower pot that was apparently 3 inches too far to the left. I stood there in my driveway, holding a wet sponge, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I thought she was just a busybody. I thought she was just testing the new guy. I was wrong. 2 days later, the first letter arrived. It was a thick envelope, certified mail. I had to sign for it. Inside was a formal notice on thick, cream-colored paper with the HOA crest at the top. Violation Notice Number 1, Nature Violation. Unapproved exterior structure. Shed or workshop. Action required. Immediate removal of the structure. Deadline, 30 days. I stayed at the paper. Removal. That workshop was on a poured concrete slab. It was wired for electricity. It wasn't a plastic shed you buy at a hardware store and pop together in an afternoon. To remove it, I would have to hire a demolition crew. I would have to rip up the foundation. It would cost me thousands of dollars. And underneath that paragraph, in bold red text, failure to comply will result in a fine of $100 per day until the violation is remedied. I walked into the kitchen and showed Sarah. She went pale. They can't do this, she said. It came with the house. It was in the listing. I know, I said. I'm going to go talk to her. It has to be a misunderstanding. I walked down the street to Brenda's house. Her house was terrifyingly perfect. The grass looked like green carpet. The hedges were cut into perfect squares. I rang the doorbell. Brenda answered. She didn't open the door all the way. She just cracked it, leaving the chain on. I got the letter, I said. Good, she said. Then you know what you have to do. Brenda, I can't tear that workshop down. It's on a foundation. It adds value to the property. It's worth $10,000. Easy. It is a violation, she repeated, like a robot. Rule 4, Section C. All outbuildings must match the siding and color of the primary residence. Yours does not. Therefore, it is illegal. It's been there for 20 years. I argued. My voice was getting louder. You can't just enforce a rule on something that's been there for 2 decades. She smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. It was the smile of someone who enjoys pain. Actually, David, I can. There is no statute of limitations on HOA violations. We just never got around to enforcing it. Until now. Why now? I asked. Why me? Because, she whispered, leaning closer to the crack in the door. I don't like the look of it. And I don't like your truck. And frankly, I don't think you fit in here. She slammed the door in my face. I heard the lock click. I stood on her porch, shaking with rage. I had sunk my life savings into this house. I had played by the rules. And now, this woman decided to ruin me because she didn't like the look of my truck? I didn't know it then, but this was just the opening shot. Brenda wasn't just going to find me. She was going to try to take my house. But she made one critical mistake. She thought I was just some dumb carpenter who would roll over and pay. She didn't know that when I get obsessed with something, I don't stop. I wasn't going to tear down my workshop. I was going to tear down her kingdom. I spent the next 3 days preparing for war. But I was naive. I thought I was preparing for debate. I thought if I just showed them logic, reason, and common sense, they would back down. I printed out photos of the workshop from the original real estate listing. I found the old permit from the county. It was 20 years old, fading, but it showed that a structure was approved on the property back in 2004. I organized everything into a neat little binder. I felt confident. I told Sarah, don't worry. Brenda is just one person. There's a whole board of directors. Once they see the evidence, they'll overrule her. Sarah didn't look convinced. She was already losing sleep. She seemed pretty sure of herself, Dave. She's a bully, I said. Bullies fold when you stand up to them. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a sterile, beige building that smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. I walked in 5 minutes early. There were about 10 other neighbors scattered around the folding chairs. They looked tired. Nobody was talking to each other. It was silent, like a waiting room at a doctor's office where everyone has bad news. At the front of the room sat the board, 5 people behind a long table. And right in the center, sitting slightly higher than everyone else, was Brenda. She had a little wooden gavel in front of her. She didn't look up when I walked in. She was busy shuffling papers, looking important. To her left was a man who looked like he was asleep with his eyes open. That was the treasurer. To her right was a nervous-looking woman who kept checking her watch. "I call this meeting to order," Brenda announced. She banged the gavel. It was louder than it needed to be. They went through the boring stuff first. The budget for mulch. The schedule for the pool cleaning. I sat there, bouncing my leg, waiting for the new business section. Finally, Brenda looked out at the audience. "Mr. Miller," she said. She didn't call me Dave. "You requested time to speak regarding your violation." I stood up. I walked to the front. I placed my binder on the table. "Hi, everyone," I said. I tried to make eye contact with the other board members. "I'm Dave Miller. My wife and I just moved into 402 Maple Ridge. We received a violation notice for the workshop in our backyard." I opened the binder. I have proof here that the workshop was built 20 years ago. It was permitted by the county. It was part of the property when we bought it. It's unreasonable to ask me to tear down a structure that has existed for 2 decades without issue. I slid the binder toward the sleepy treasurer. He reached for it, but Brenda's hand shot out like a cobra. She placed her hand on top of the binder, stopping it. "The county permit is irrelevant," she said. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The county cares about safety codes," Brenda said. "The HOA cares about community standards. Our bylaws are stricter than the county laws. And you signed a document agreeing to those bylaws." "But it's grandfathered in," I said. "It has to be." "Show me," she said. "Show you what?" "Show me the document from the HOA board in 2004 granting a variance for that structure. Show me the signature of the president at the time approving non-matching siding." I stammered. I don't have that. The previous owner didn't leave those records." Brenda smiled. That same thin, cruel smile. "Then it doesn't exist. If there is no paper trail, it is an unauthorized modification. It must come down." "This is insane," I said. I looked at the nervous woman next to her. "You can't seriously expect me to demolish a $10,000 building because of the siding color. I can paint it. I'll paint it vinyl white to match the house. I'll do it this weekend." The nervous woman looked at Brenda. Brenda just stayed straight ahead. "The bylaws state that the material must match," Brenda recited. "Vinyl matches vinyl. Cedar does not match vinyl. Painting it is not a remedy. Removal is the only remedy. Is anyone else going to speak?" I asked the board. "Does anyone else think this is crazy?" Silence. The treasurer looked down at his shoes. The nervous woman scribbled on her notepad. They were terrified of her. I realized then that this wasn't a democracy. It was a dictatorship. "Your request for an appeal is denied," Brenda said. Bang. She hit the gavel. Next item. I walked out of that meeting with my blood boiling. I felt helpless, but I still thought, okay, I'll just ignore them. Let them fine me. They can't actually make me pay. That was the second mistake. The fine started arriving 3 days later. Violation, unapproved structure. Fine, $100. Violation, continuing noncompliance. Fine, $100. Every single day, a new envelope in the mailbox. It became a ritual of torture. I would come home from work, tired, my back aching, and I would see the little red flag up on the mailbox. My stomach would drop. Saturday came. I was in the garage working on a project, trying to distract myself. I heard a truck engine idling outside. I walked out. A tow truck was backing up to my driveway. I sprinted down the lawn. Hey, what are you doing?" The driver, a big guy with a beard, stopped. He pointed to a clipboard. "Work order. An authorized commercial vehicle parked in a residential zone. Tow requested by HOA management. I'm in my own driveway." I shouted, "And I'm standing right here." "Look, buddy," the driver said. "I just get the call. The lady said you've been warned." "Brenda," I spat the name out. "I had to move my truck. I had to drive it 3 blocks away and park it in front of a public park, outside the neighborhood gates. Then I had to walk back to my own house. I felt like a criminal. I felt watched. From that day on, I couldn't park at my own home. I had to carry my tools, heavy saws, drills, tool belts, 3 blocks every morning and every evening, rain or shine. And Brenda was watching. I would see her curtains twitch when I walked past her house, hauling my gear. But she wasn't done. The workshop was the big target. But now she decided to go for the death by 1,000 cuts. Tuesday, violation notice. Garbage can visible from street. I had left the bin out for 1 hour after the truck came. Fine, $50. Thursday, violation notice. Lawn exceeds maximum height of 3 inches. I measured it. It was 3.1 inches. She had literally come onto my property with a ruler. Fine, $50. Sunday, violation notice. All stain on driveway. It was a drop of water from the air conditioner of my wife's car. It wasn't even oil. I sent a photo proving it was water. Brenda rejected the appeal. Stains are unsightly regardless of composition. Fine, $50. It was psychological warfare. I stopped feeling comfortable in my own home. I felt like I was living in a glass box. Sarah stopped going for walks. She was afraid of running into Brenda. We started closing all the blinds, living in the dark. Then came the financial hit. At the end of the month, we got the statement. Total fines and interest, $3,450. 00. Sarah looked at the bill and burst into tears. She sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Dave, we can't afford this, she sobbed. We don't have an extra $3,000 a month. We're going to burn through our emergency fund in 2 months. We have to tear down the workshop. Please, just tear it down. It broke my heart to see her like that. This house was supposed to be our happy ending. If we tear it down, I said, my voice shaking, she wins. And she won't stop there, Sarah. She'll find something else. She wants us out. Well, maybe we should leave. Sarah yelled. Maybe we should just sell and get out of here. We can't sell. I slammed my hand on the table. Who is going to buy a house with thousands of dollars in active HOA liens and an active dispute? We'd have to pay the fines to sell it anyway. We are trapped. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan. I felt like a failure. I was a man who couldn't protect his wife, couldn't park his truck at his own house, couldn't use his own backyard. The next day, the final notice arrived. It wasn't a fine this time. It was a legal threat. Notice of intent to lien and foreclose. The letter explained, in cold legal terms, that because we had not paid the fines, the HOA was placing a lien on our property. If the balance wasn't paid in full within 60 days, along with legal fees, which were another $2,000, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings to auction off our home to satisfy the debt. I read the letter 3 times. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. They were going to take my house. Over a shed. And the worst part was, the law was on their side. In our state, HOAs have incredible power. They really can foreclose on you. I sat on the front porch steps, the letter crumped in my fist. I looked at the oak tree. I looked at the neighborhood that seemed so perfect and quiet. It was all a lie. It was a trap. I looked down the street at Brenda's house. Her lights were on. She was probably in there, eating dinner, watching TV, completely unbothered by the fact that she was destroying a family's life. I felt a shift inside me. The fear evaporated. The sadness dried up. What was left was something cold. Something hard. Sarah was right about one thing. We couldn't afford to fight them with money. We would go broke before we won. But I realized I had been fighting the wrong way. I had been trying to defend myself against their rules. I had been playing their game. I needed to change the game. I stood up. I smoothed out the crumpled letter. You want to talk about rules, Brenda? I whispered to the empty street. You want to be a stickler for the paperwork. I walked inside. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went straight to my office. I turned on my computer. I wasn't going to look for a lawyer. I couldn't afford one. I was going to look for the origin of the neighborhood. I was going to look for the one thing that every tyrant overlooks, the foundation of their own power. I brewed a pot of coffee. It was 8 p.m. I didn't know it then, but I wouldn't leave that chair for the next 14 hours. I was done being the victim. It was time to go hunting. I drank 4 cups of coffee that night. My eyes were burning, dry and red, staring at the blue light of my monitor. I started with the obvious stuff. I read the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and ROS, from front to back. It was 40 pages of legal jargon designed to trap people. Every sentence seemed to tighten the noose around my neck. The association reserves the right. The board shall have sole discretion. The homeowner waives the right to. It looked airtight. According to these documents, which were filed in 1998 when the Maple Ridge subdivision was built, they owned me. They had the right to fine me, the right to tow me, and yes, the right to foreclose on me. I felt the despair creeping back in. It was 3 a.m. Sarah was asleep upstairs, or pretending to be. I knew she was probably lying awake, worrying about where we would live next month. I almost gave up. I moved the mouse to close the browser. But then, my thumb hovered over a bookmark I had saved years ago when we bought the house. It was the county GIS map. It's a public database that shows property lines, tax assessments, and satellite views. I clicked it. The map loaded, showing the neat little grid of Maple Ridge. I zoomed in on my lot. Lot 42. There was something weird about it. In the digital map, all the other lots were perfect rectangles or pie slices. But the line for my backyard, the back corner where the workshop stood, didn't line up perfectly with the neighbor's fence. There was a tiny, jagged jog in the line. A little notch. I zoomed in further. The GIS system had a feature where you could overlay historical aerial photos. I clicked on 1990. The neighborhood disappeared. It was just fields. I clicked 1980. Still fields. A farmhouse stood where Brenda's house is now. I clicked 1960. And there it was. The farmhouse was there. But where my house sits now, there was nothing but trees. Except for one thing. In the back corner, exactly where my workshop is, there was a structure. A small, square building. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't built 20 years ago, I whispered. It was rebuilt. The workshop wasn't just some addition the previous owner slapped up in 2004. The foundation, the footprint, had been there for over 60 years. I looked back at the HOA documents. They were filed in 1998. If that structure existed before 1998, and if it was legally established on the land before the HOA even existed, they might not have jurisdiction over it. But a blurry satellite photo wasn't proof. I needed paper. I needed the chain of title. I needed to see who owned this dirt before the developers came in with their bulldozers and their vinyl siding. I called in sick to work the next morning. I didn't care. I had a bigger job to do. I drove to the county recorder's office. It's in the basement of the old courthouse downtown, a place that smells like floor wax and old dust. It's not a place where people go for fun. It's where you go when you're dealing with death, divorce, or debt. There were rows of long metal cabinets and a few computer terminals. Behind the counter sat a woman who looked like she had been part of the building since it was constructed. She had gray hair pulled into a tight bun and glasses on a chain. Her name tag said Mrs. Higgins. "Help you?" she asked, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Yes," I said. "I need to research the deed history for a property. I need to go back as far as possible." Address: 402 Maple Ridge Drive. She typed it in. That's a subdivision, platted in 1998. The records are all digitized. "I know," I said, "but I need to see what was there before the subdivision. I need to see the parent tract." She stopped typing. She looked over her glasses at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of interest. Most people just want a copy of their current deed. Nobody asked for the parent tract. "That means digging into the bound volumes," she said. "We haven't skinned anything prior to 1980. "I have time," I said. She pointed to the back of the room. "Index books are on the left. Find the grantor or grantee index. Trace the sale backward until you find the legal description change." I spent the next 4 hours lifting heavy, leather-bound books. My back hurt. My eyes hurt. I was tracing names. 2015, Dave Miller bought from John Smith. 2004, John Smith bought from Maple Ridge Developers LLC. 1998, Maple Ridge Developers LLC bought from the Henderson Estate. There it was, the Henderson Estate. I pulled the deed from 1998. This was the document where the developers bought the farm to turn it into the neighborhood. It was a massive document, pages and pages of legal descriptions of metes and bounds, compass directions and distances. I read through the transfer. It described the land being sold. All that certain tract or parcel of land situated in the county of containing 50 acres more or less. And then I saw the word, accepting. In legal terms, accepting is the magic word. It means everything here is sold, except for this specific part. I read the paragraph carefully. Accepting and reserving unto the grantor, their heirs and assigns, that certain 25-acre parcel located at the northwest corner, described in the deed recorded in Book 405, page 82, the carriage house lot, together with a perpetual easement for access. I froze. The carriage house lot. The developers had bought the farm, but for some reason, maybe a family squabble, maybe a stubborn heir, they hadn't bought that specific quarter-acre corner. I grabbed the next book. Book 405, page 82. The book was from 1955. The pages were yellow and brittle. I turned to page 82. It was a deed regarding a workshop and storage barn built by Elias Henderson. The deed explicitly stated that this specific patch of land was designated for agricultural and trade use and was subject to a senior restrictive covenant. I kept reading. My hands were shaking so bad I was afraid I'd tear the paper. The covenant said, "This parcel shall run with the land and shall remain free of any residential subdivision restrictions, encumbrances, or aesthetic regulations imposed by future developments to ensure the continued operation of the Henderson family trade." I sat back in the wooden chair. The air left my lungs in a rush. Do you understand what this meant? When the developers built Maple Ridge, they bought the land around that corner. They paved the streets. They built the houses. But legally, my backyard, the specific square of dirt where my workshop stood, was never fully merged into the Maple Ridge subdivision legal entity. It was an out parcel, a legal island. Technically, my house was in the HOA. My driveway was in the HOA. My front lawn was in the HOA. But the workshop, the land underneath it, it was legally a separate piece of land that just happened to be attached to my deed. And according to this 1955 document, it was immune to subdivision restrictions. The HOA had no power there. None. Zero. They had been fining me for a building that existed in a different legal dimension. I looked around the dusty room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip a table. I had found the smoking gun. It wasn't just a loophole. It was a nuclear bomb. But I needed to be sure. I couldn't just walk into the next meeting waving a 70-year-old piece of paper. Brenda would just laugh and bang her gavel. I needed to weaponize this. I took the book to Mrs. Higgins. "I need a certified copy of this," I said, "and the 1998 transfer deed, and the original plat map." She looked at the page. She read the accepting clause. She looked at me, and a slow grin spread across her face. She knew exactly what I had found. "You found a ghost lot," she said softly. "I think I did." "That's going to make someone very unhappy," she said, stamping the page with the official county seal. "K.A. Chunk." "I hope so," I said. I paid the $10 for the copies. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight. I felt lighter. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. I sat in my truck and looked at the documents. I had the sword, but I realized something as I drove home. If I just showed them this, they would back off. They would drop the fines. They would leave me alone. But that wasn't enough anymore. They had made my wife cry. They had towed my truck. They had threatened to take my home. They had humiliated me. I didn't want peace. I wanted revenge. I didn't want them to just stop. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to dismantle their little power trip piece by piece. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the land notice. Not the HOA board. The HOA's lawyer. The expensive firm they hired to bully homeowners. A receptionist answered. "Law offices of Smith & Wesson. How may I direct your call?" "My name is David Miller," I said. I'm a defendant in a foreclosure action initiated by your client, the Maple Ridge HOA. One moment. A lawyer came on the line. He sounded arrogant. Mr. Miller, unless you are calling to arrange payment of the full balance, there is nothing to discuss. I'm not calling to pay, I said. I'm calling to make a settlement offer. He laughed. We don't settle, Mr. Miller. We foreclose. You're going to want to hear this offer, I said. Because if you don't, I'm going to file a quiet title action based on a chain of title defect that invalidates your client's jurisdiction. And then I'm going to sue your firm for malicious prosecution and FDCPA violations. Silence on the other end. The arrogance vanished instantly. Lawyers know those words. Those are dangerous words. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice sharp. I have a document from 1955, I said, and a deed from 1998. You guys missed an exclusion clause. The land you're trying to foreclose on, you don't govern it. Send it to me, he demanded. No, I said. I'm not sending you anything. If you want to see it, you tell your client, Brenda, to call an emergency town hall meeting. All neighbors invited. This Saturday. I'll present my evidence then. We don't take orders from you, he snapped. Fine, I said. Then I'll see you in Superior Court on Monday. And I'll be asking for damages. Massive damages. I hung up. My hands were steady. I drove home. I pulled into my driveway. I walked past the spot where my truck used to be parked. I walked into the kitchen. Sarah was sitting at the table, looking at a stack of bills. She looked up, eyes red. Where were you? She asked. I walked over and kissed her on the forehead. I placed the certified, stamped envelope on the table. I was getting the ammunition, I said. Get your nice dress ready, honey. We're going to a meeting on Saturday. Dave, what is this? This, I said, is how we burn it all down. The Saturday morning sun was bright, but inside the community center, the air was heavy. It felt like a courtroom before verdict. I had spent the last 48 hours rehearsing. I wasn't just going to show a piece of paper. I was going to put on a show. I had scanned the documents. I had made enlarged copies mounted on foam boards. I had a timeline. When Sarah and I walked in, the room was fuller than I had ever seen it. Usually, 3 or 4 people showed up to these meetings. Today, there were 50. Word had gotten around. People knew something was happening. They saw the emergency meeting signs and smelled blood. Brenda was already at the head table. She was wearing a bright red blazer today. Power red. She looked like a general surveying her troops. Next to her sat a man in a sharp gray suit. He had a leather briefcase and a haircut that cost more than my weekly paycheck. That was the lawyer. I walked to the front row and sat down. Sarah squeezed my hand. Her palm was sweating. It's going to be okay, I whispered. Just end it, she said. Brenda banged the gavel. Bang, bang. This emergency meeting is called to order, she announced. Her voice echoed off the cinder block walls. We are here because Mr. Miller has refused to comply with community standards and has requested a special hearing before legal action is finalized. She looked down at me with pure disdain. Mr. Miller, she said, we have our legal counsel, Mr. Sterling, present. If you have a payment plan to propose, state it now. Otherwise, we are wasting everyone's time. I stood up. I didn't walk to the podium. I walked to the table. I placed my stack of foam boards face down. I'm not here to propose a payment plan, Brenda, I said. My voice was steady. I turned to look at the lawyer. Mr. Sterling, good to meet you. I assume you've reviewed the foreclosure file? The lawyer looked bored. I have. The violation is clear. The lien is valid. And you checked the title work yourself. I asked. Personally. He scoffed. We have paralegals for that. The property is Lot 42 of the Maple Ridge subdivision. It is subject to the CC and RS recorded in 1998. Right, I said. Lot 42. That's what the tax map says today. I picked up the first foam board and flipped it over. It was the blown-up satellite image from 1960. This, I said to the room, is this land 50 years ago. I pointed to the black and white square in the corner of the field. This is the structure that stands in my backyard. It was a trade workshop built by Elias Henderson. Brenda rolled her eyes. History lessons are not relevant, Mr. Miller. The rules are the rules. I'm getting there, I said. I flipped the second board. It was a 1998 deed of transfer, the document where the developers bought the land to build our neighborhood. I had highlighted the accepting clause in bright neon yellow. It was blown up so big that people in the back row could read it. Mr. Sterling, I said, can you read that highlighted paragraph for the room? The lawyer squinted. He leaned forward. He read it silently first. I saw his eyes stop. I saw his eyebrows knit together. He reached into his pocket and put on a pair of reading glasses. He read it again. Read it out loud, please, I pushed. He cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable, accepting and reserving that certain 25-acre parcel known as the carriage house lot. And what does that mean, in legal terms? I asked. The room was dead silent. Even Brenda looked confused. She looked at her lawyer, waiting for him to shut me down. It means. The lawyer started, then he stopped. He looked at me. Do you have the survey for this exception? I do. I slapped the third board down. It was a 1955 survey. It clearly showed the square cutout. And, I added, dropping the final bomb, I have a senior restrictive covenant from 1955 which states that this specific parcel is, quote, immune to subdivision restrictions and aesthetic regulations. I turned to the neighbors. The HOA doesn't own my backyard, I said. When the developer bought this land, they failed to buy that corner. It is a legal island. It is an out parcel. It is not part of Maple Ridge. It never was. I turned back to Brenda. Her face had gone pale. You have been fining me for a structure that is not on HOA land, I said. You have been trespassing on private property to measure my grass on land you do not govern. And you tried to foreclose on my home based on a debt that does not legally exist. Brenda stood up. Her face turned from pale to purple. That is ridiculous, she shrieked. You live in this neighborhood. You use our roads. You signed the papers. I signed papers for Lot 42, I said. But the workshop sits on the Henderson exception. And you have no power there. She slammed her hand on the table. I am the president. I decide what the boundaries are. I decide the rules. I looked at the lawyer. Mr. Sterling, I think you better explain property law to your client before she admits to more harassment on public record. The lawyer was frantically shuffling through his own papers. He was sweating now. He knew exactly what this meant. If they foreclosed on a property they didn't have jurisdiction over, it wasn't just a mistake. It was slander of title. It was a massive lawsuit. Brenda, the lawyer whispered, sit down. No, she yelled. He is lying. He is a troublemaker. I want his truck towed. I want that shed gone by Monday. Brenda, shut up, the lawyer snapped. His voice cracked like a whip. The whole room gasped. Nobody had ever spoken to Brenda like that. The lawyer stood up. He looked at me. He looked at the documents. He looked at the 50 angry neighbors watching him. He was doing the math. He realized that if he supported Brenda, his law firm would be on the hook for millions in damages. He made a business decision. He cut her loose. Mr. Miller, the lawyer said, his voice tight. If these documents are authenticated, and they appear to be, then there has been a significant administrative error. An error. I laughed. You tried to steal my house. We will withdraw the lien immediately, the lawyer said, and we will void the fines related to the structure. No. Brenda screamed. You can't do that. He has to pay. You are exposing the association to liability. Brenda, the lawyer shouted back at her. Sit down and be quiet. I looked at the crowd. They were whispering. They were smiling. The spell was broken. The dragon wasn't invincible. She was just a crazy old lady being yelled at by her own lawyer. I'm not done, I said. I walked closer to the table. Voiding the fines is a good start, I said. But you harassed my family. You towed my truck illegally because I was parked in front of the workshop, which we now know is on the exception lot, meaning I wasn't on HOA land when you towed me. That's grand theft auto, technically. The lawyer wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Mr. Miller, let's not be dramatic. We can discuss a settlement for the towing fees. I don't want the fees, I said. I want her resignation. I pointed a finger straight at Brenda. She has abused her power. She has targeted neighbors. She has spent the association's money on legal fees to fight battles she can't win. She is a liability to every single person in this room. I turned to the crowd. How many of you have been fined for nonsense? I asked. How many of you have been threatened? A hand went up in the back. Then another. Then a woman stood up. She fined me for having a wreath on my door in January, the woman said. She measured my grass with a ruler too, a man shouted. She told me my children were too loud. It was an avalanche. Years of resentment poured out. Brenda looked around, eyes wide, terrified. She was losing the room. She was losing her kingdom. This is a mutiny. Brenda stammered. You can't remove me. I was elected. Actually, I said, pulling one last document from my folder. I read the bylaws last night. 2. Section 8, Paragraph 4. A board member may be removed by a vote of no confidence from 51% of the homeowners present at a quorum. I looked at the crowd. I moved for a vote of no confidence, I said. I second it, the neighbor with the wreath shouted. I third it, the man with the grass shouted. Brenda looked at her lawyer for help. He was busy packing his briefcase. He wanted no part of this. He wouldn't even look at her. All in favor. I asked. Every single hand in the room went up. Even the treasurer raised his hand, looking sheepish. Motion carries, I said. You're fired, Brenda. Get out of the chair. For a second, I thought she was going to refuse. She gripped the gavel like a weapon. Her knuckles were white. She looked at me with pure hatred. You ruined this neighborhood, she hissed. It's going to go to hell without me. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be free, I said. Now move. She stood up, trembling. She dropped the gavel on the table. It didn't make a bang this time. It just made a dull clatter. She grabbed her purse and walked out the side door, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Nobody said a word until the door clicked shut. Then, the room erupted. People were cheering. Someone slapped me on the back. Sarah was crying. But this time, there were happy tears. She ran up and hugged me. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. The lawyer came up to me. He handed me a business card. Call my office on Monday. We'll cut a check for the towing and the legal fees. Just, please don't file that quiet title suit. We'll see, I said. I looked at the empty chair where Brenda had sat today. I looked at the gavel lying on the table. I had won. I had destroyed the tyrant. I had saved my home. But as I walked out of the community center, high-fiving my neighbors, I realized that winning the war is one thing. Living in the peace is another. Because when you take down the king, sometimes you inherit the crown whether you want it or not. And Brenda, people like that don't just disappear. They wait in the shadows. The Monday after the meeting, the phone rang at 9 a.m. sharp. It was Mr. Sterling, the HOA lawyer. His voice was different this time. Gone was the arrogance, the boredom, the condescension. He sounded like a man trying to defuse a bomb with a pair of rusty pliers. Mr. Miller, he said, I have drafted the settlement agreement. We are prepared to wipe the slate clean. I'm listening, I said. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking coffee, looking at my workshop. It looked different to me now. It wasn't just a shed, it was a fortress. The association acknowledges that the parcel described as the Henderson exception is outside the jurisdiction of the Maple Ridge HOA, Sterling recited. We are removing all fines. We are removing the lien. We are issuing a formal apology. And the damages? I asked. We are authorized to offer you $5,000, he said quickly, to cover the towing, your time, and the stress. I took a sip of coffee. Make it 10. Mr. Miller, that is $10,000, I interrupted. Or I file the quiet title suit, and I name you personally for malpractice for filing a fraudulent lien without checking the chain of title. How much will your malpractice insurance premiums go up next year, Mr. Sterling? There was a long pause. I could hear him typing furiously. Fine, he grunted. 10,000. But you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific legal details of the settlement. I'll sign that I won't sue you, I said. But I'm framing that deed, and I'm parking my truck wherever I want. Agreed. The check will be couriered to you by noon. I hung up. I looked at Sarah. She was standing in the doorway, holding her breath. "Well," she asked. "They are paying us 10 grand, I said. "And the workshop stays." She let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Then she ran over and tackled me in a hug. We stood there on the porch, laughing like idiots. We had won. We had actually beaten the system. But the real victory wasn't the money. The real victory happened that afternoon. I drove my truck, my muddy, dented, beautiful work truck, up the driveway. I didn't stop at the street. I didn't hide it behind a bush. I parked it right in front of the garage door, in plain sight of the entire world. I got out, slammed the door, and patted the hood. It felt like planting a flag on the moon. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. It was like a spell had been broken. With Brenda gone from the board, the rule of fear evaporated. People started leaving their garage doors open. Kids started playing in the front yards again. Apparently, Brenda had a rule against unauthorized sporting activities that she enforced strictly. A week later, I saw a basketball hoop go up 2 houses down. A month before, that would have resulted in a fine. Now, it just resulted in kids having fun. The neighbor with the illegal wreath kept it up until March. Just because she could. We held a new election for the board. Nobody really wanted the job. Everyone was still traumatized. But we elected a group of 3 younger homeowners. Their platform was simple. We will mow the common areas, pay the insurance, and otherwise leave everyone the hell alone. They asked me to run for president. "You're the hero," the treasurer told me. "You took her down. You should lead." I shook my head. "I don't want to rule the neighborhood," I told him. "I just want to build cabinets in my workshop." And that's exactly what I did. But there was one loose end. Brenda. She didn't show her face for weeks. Her blinds were always drawn. Her car never moved. She became a ghost in her own kingdom. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then, about 2 months after the showdown, a for sale sign went up in her yard. It wasn't a standard sign. It was from a discount broker. She was getting out fast. I was in the driveway one Saturday, washing my truck, because I wanted to, not because I had to, when I saw the moving van pull up. It wasn't a professional crew. It was just Brenda and a couple of grim-looking relatives loading boxes. She looked smaller. Her bright blonde hair looked faded. She wasn't wearing the power blazer. She was wearing a gray tracksuit. She looked like just another old lady. She walked out to her car carrying a box of what looked like files, probably the HOA record she had obsessed over for years. She stopped at the curb and looked up. She saw me. I stopped scrubbing. I stood up straight, holding the sponge. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just looked at her. She stayed at me for a long moment. There was no fire left in her eyes, just bitterness. She shook her head, muttered something to herself, got into her beige sedan, and drove away. She didn't look back. I watched her turn the corner and disappear. The Wicked Witch was gone. A young couple bought her house a month later. They have a golden retriever that barks sometimes, and they park 2 cars in the driveway. They are nice people. They have no idea that their living room used to be the command center of a dictatorship. As for the workshop, I did exactly what I said I would. I framed the 1955 deed. It hangs right over my workbench, next to my table saw. Sometimes, when I'm working late at night, smelling the sawdust and the cedar, I look up at that piece of paper. I look at the words accepting and reserving. It's a reminder. The world is full of Brendas. There will always be people who want to control you, people who want to measure your grass, people who want to tell you that you don't fit in. They will use rules, bureaucracy, and shame to try and make you small. They rely on you being afraid. They rely on you assuming they have the power. But sometimes, if you dig deep enough, if you refuse to move, if you look at the fine print, you realize that their power is an illusion. They thought I was just a carpenter living on their land. They didn't know I was living on an island. I finished my latest project last week. It was a beautiful, handcrafted mahogany gavel. I didn't keep it. I walked down to the new board president's house and gave it to him as a gift. "What's this for?" he asked, admiring the wood grain. "It's for the meetings," I said. "Use it wisely. Don't bang it too hard." He laughed. "Thanks, Dave." I walked back home, under the shade of the big oak trees, past the open garage doors and the basketball hoops. I walked into my backyard, stepped onto the concrete slab of my workshop, and closed the door. I was safe. I was home. And for the first time in a long time, it was quiet.